Everyone has heard the phrase about digging a hole straight through the earth and coming out in China, and almost every person who repeats it has never once checked where that hole would actually surface. So I took the real boundary polygons of every country on Earth and computed point by point what is sitting on the exact opposite side of the planet from each one of them. The answer is that for the overwhelming majority of people alive today, the far end of that hole opens into open ocean, thousands of kilometers from the nearest shore. And the childhood version of the story is wrong almost everywhere it is told. There is exactly one large country where the phrase turns out to be literally true. There is a European capital that comes out inside a city on the far side of the world. And there is a chain of tropical islands that surfaces in the middle of southern Africa. These are the places that sit back to back through 8,000 kilometers of solid rock. The method matters here because this question normally gets answered with one example and a shrug. I laid a grid across the real coastlines of every country, sampling every eighth of a degree, which works out to several 100,000 separate points of land. And for each point, I flipped the latitude, rotated the longitude by 180 degrees, and asked what was underneath the far end. That turns a party question into an actual measurement. And it means every number in this video was computed from the shape of the countries themselves, rather than repeated from somewhere else. Start with why the answer is so often water, because that single fact quietly explains almost everything that follows it. Oceans cover roughly 7/10 of the surface of the planet. So even if land and sea had been scattered completely at random, you would expect most holes to come out somewhere wet. But the real arrangement is far more lopsided than a random chance would ever produce. Because the continents are bunched so heavily into one half of the globe that the half facing away from them is very nearly empty water from edge to edge. That is exactly why the phrase fails hardest in the country where it gets repeated the most. Dig straight down from New York and you surface in the Indian Ocean, about 1,000 kilometers southwest of the Australian coast, with nothing but open water in every direction for days of sailing. Los Angeles comes out even further from anywhere at all, deep in the southern Indian Ocean, where the nearest land of any kind is a scatter of small islands more than 1,500 kilometers away. Every single state of the mainland United States sits opposite open water, which means the version of the joke that generations of Americans grew up with is wrong for every person who has ever told it. The same disappointment is waiting for most of the great cities of the world, and the list runs longer than anybody would guess. London surfaces in the empty South Pacific, roughly 700 kilometers south of New Zealand, and well past anything you could stand on. Tokyo comes out in the South Atlantic, more than 1,000 kilometers east of Uruguay, and Sydney comes out in the Atlantic as well, a few hundred kilometers west of Portugal, which is about as far north of Australia as it is possible to end up. Cairo, Mumbai, Kyiv, and Cape Town all open into water as we, and in every one of those cases you would need a boat at the far end, rather than a shovel. Spain is where the whole picture finally changes, and it changes about as dramatically as it possibly could. Madrid sits almost exactly opposite the North Island of New Zealand, which means those two countries are very nearly back to back, through the dead center of the Earth, separated by the entire diameter of the planet and by nothing else whatsoever. Fly that same journey across the surface instead, and you are taking very close to the longest flight that it is physically possible to take, because there is no way to get further from Spain and still be standing on solid ground. The pairing runs in both directions, and the New Zealanders tend to know about it rather better than the Spanish do. Stand in Auckland, dig straight down through the core, and you surface in Spain, a few hundred kilometers from Madrid, in country that could hardly look less like the place you started. There are Spanish towns and New Zealand towns that are as far apart as 2 points on this planet are capable of being, and the only thing lying between them is 12,000 kilometers of rock and iron. Now, for the one country where the old phrase is actually true, and it is not the one that anybody ever guesses. Beijing sits opposite Argentina, out in the dry country to the west of Buenos Aires, which means that the only people on Earth who could dig a hole straight down and genuinely arrive in China are Argentinians. The joke has been told for well over a century in entirely the wrong hemisphere, by people whose hole would have filled with the Indian Ocean long before it reached anywhere near Asia. Hawaii produces the strangest single result on the whole list, and it is worth stopping on for a moment. Honolulu sits opposite Botswana, a country that is landlocked, dry, and about as far from a Pacific island as a place can manage to be in character as well as in distance. A chain of volcanic islands sitting in the middle of the largest ocean on Earth turns out to be back-to-back with the Kalahari, and the two of them have nothing whatsoever in common except a single straight line drawn through the core of the planet. Antarctica turns out to be the quiet giant of this entire question, and it distorts the totals more than anything else does. Almost the whole continent sits opposite the Arctic Ocean, which is water, so most of that enormous landmass produces no match at all. But the parts of it that do line up with land line up with the largest and coldest things in the northern hemisphere. So Antarctica faces Greenland, and it faces northern Canada, and it faces the Russian Arctic. The two frozen ends of the Earth are staring straight through the planet at each other, ice to ice, and nobody ever mentions it. So how much of it actually lines up in the end? Running that grid across every country on Earth gives 14%. 14% of all the land on this planet has more land waiting on the opposite side of the world, and the remaining 86% opens into ocean. Antarctica and the Arctic account for a large share of even that 14%. So if you are asking about the inhabited world, the odds are worse still. And for almost everybody watching this, the far end of the hole is going to be saltwater. The biggest matched pairs are worth listing properly because they are not remotely the ones that people expect. Argentina and China are the largest country-to-country pairing anywhere on Earth, by a very wide margin, followed by Brazil and Indonesia, then Chile and China, then Colombia and Indonesia. Peru comes out in Vietnam and in Cambodia, and Brazil also reaches the Philippines and Malaysia. Almost every one of those pairs connects South America to Southeast Asia, which happens to be the only place on the entire globe where two substantial landmasses sit properly opposite one another. There is one more pattern hiding inside the numbers, and it explains everything else at a stroke. I ran the same grid to find which half of the globe holds the most land, and the answer centers on Western France, at 45 degrees north and 0 degrees east, with 80% of all the land on Earth crammed into that single hemisphere. The half facing directly away from it is almost entirely ocean, which is why Europe stares into the South Pacific, why North America stares into the Indian Ocean, and why the only serious land-to-land connections left over are the ones running from South America across to Asia. So, a phrase that children have repeated for 100 years turns out to be a piece of geography that almost nobody has ever bothered to check. For most of the world, the hole comes out in open water. For Spain, it comes out in New Zealand. For Hawaii, it comes out in the Kalahari. And for Argentina alone, it comes out exactly where the story always promised it would. 8,000 kilometers of rock separate every single one of those pairs. And until somebody actually measures it, there is no way at all to know which one you happen to be standing over right now. Which of these pairs surprised you the most? And tell me in the comments, because I do read every single one of them. If you enjoyed this, the next video measures another thing that everybody assumes they already know, and finds out that they do not.